Okay, that last video cut me off down here, so I'm going to go back to 2 and explain this a little better. So, rate of change, not an integer. That means it's not a whole number or its opposite. Explain it or express it as a fraction. We did that. And then I was trying to explain the labels. So, if you look at the slope formula up here, slope is change in y's over change in x. So y's are in the numerator, x's are in the denominator. So whatever's on the top of my slope is going to be the y. So in this case, it's cost in dollars. So I wrote dollars down here. Whatever's in the denominator of slope is going to be your x. So I look up here, what's x? Pounds. So I put this by the numerator, the y, because remember how I said it's always y per x. Every time you're asked to write rate of change, put that right there to be your guide. Y per x. So dollars per pound, or cost in dollars per pound. So it's always y per x when you go to label it. So y, this is the per sign, and here's the x. So then it says, explain its meaning in the context of the situation. So that would be 4 pounds of candy costs $3, or for $3 you can buy 4 pounds of candy. So whatever you like, $3 per 4 pounds of candy if you want to use that. So it costs $3 per 4 pounds of candy. And so you're probably going, wait a minute, you told us to always use 1. We want to know how much 1 pound of candy costs. Well, this one they asked us to use the fraction. So with the fraction, we can't make that 1 without making that a decimal. So that's the only way to do it is put your y label up there, put your x label down here. And again, that's because of slope. And then just read it how you see it, $3 per 4 pounds of candy, or lots of students will write it the other way because it kind of sounds better. 4 pounds of candy costs $3. Most missed thing, we give a quiz on this in an in-person class. Most missed thing on it is students write 3 pounds costs $4. Well, pounds isn't the y, so you can't say that because y is in the numerator, x is in the denominator. So be careful with that. That's why I always write this, y per x, so I remember. So y, there's the label, per x, there's the label. Okay, express the rate of change as a decimal. We already did that. And it's a rate of change, so we have to use the per, so it's 75 cents per pound of candy purchase. Explain its meaning. Okay, I should write a nice sentence. It costs 75 cents per pound of candy purchased. There. Now it's a real sentence. So I always get mad at students for writing like, what are those called? What's the English word when it's just part of a sentence? I can't remember what the word is. I'm like, you have to have a noun, or a subject, you have to have a verb. So that's why I added that in. So now it's a full sentence. It's not a fragment. That's what it's called, sentence fragment. So it costs 75 cents per pound of candy purchased. Write an equation to represent the situation. Let y equal the total cost and x equal pounds of candy. So we need to think of, whenever these words come out, y equals mx plus b is what you should write from the last module. Remember how I said this module is just a compilation of the modules before it? We have to solve equations. We have to know what slope is. We have to know the y equals mx plus b. So all of those things come into play in this module. And that's why I just didn't want to go fast on this one, just because it ties everything together. So to write an equation, we have to know m and we have to know b. And let's see if you remember these things. So m is what's in front of x, and that's what we call the slope or rate of change. You guys remember that from the last module? And what do you remember about b? Y-intercept is 0, b. You remember y-intercept means make x 0? Had that on your last test, didn't you? So when I make x 0, what would 0 pounds of candy cost? Duh, right? $0, because see how it's going up by 75, because it's 75 cents per pound. So that means 0 pounds of candy are $0. So do you agree that when x is 0, b has to be 0? So when x is 0, the cost has to be 0. So that means our y-intercept is 0, 0. So we know b is 0. And don't we know m? Didn't we find it in two different ways? This or this. Does it matter which one you use? Absolutely not. If this was not a nice ending number, let's say it was 0.3333333, then you would not use that. But this is a nice terminating decimal, so in this case you could use either one. But if this was 1/3 and this was 0.3333, you would not use the decimal. We can't use rounded numbers in a sentence, so then you would have to use a fraction. But in this case, both are good. So let's just stay with the money. So y equals, in place of m, we're going to put the rate of change, 0.75 x plus b, we just said 0 pounds of candy costs $0, so that'd be 0. So there's your equation. And that's kind of our focus in this chapter, is writing equations. So we have to find the slope. Then we make x 0 so we can find the y-intercept, and we can see from the table when x is 0, the pounds of candy is 0, the cost is going to be $0, so 0, 0. So m goes here, b, or the y-intercept, the y-coordinate of the y-intercept goes there. So now it says we're going to use our equation to find these two values. So the total cost of 7 pounds of candy. So we need to look up here and say, oh, x is pounds of candy. So my x is right here, because it says x equal pounds of candy, because some students think you always plug in for x. That is not true. Sometimes you're going to plug in for y, sometimes for x. That's why you look and see what x is, pounds of candy, and this is pounds of candy, so it's going to be x. So to find our cost, we're going to put 7 in place of x. So 0.75 times 7 plus 0. So now we can plug that in our calculator. Trying to get it a little bit brighter. Maybe this will help. Okay, there we go. So we have 0.75 times 7 plus 0, which we don't really need to write. So that's $5.25. So y equals, and you do have to label it. This says cost, so $5.25 according to our calculator. So I just type that in, 0.75 times 7 plus 0. So $5.25. And if they asked you to write a sentence, you guys can all do that, right? 7 pounds of candy. Let's go ahead and do it because we need practice. So you're not really supposed to start a sentence. with a number. So we're going to write it out. So 7 pounds of candy costs $5.25. So that's what you would write if they would ask you for a sentence. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing with 6, but this time they gave us money. So then we look up here, and let's get our highlighter because this is important highlighter stuff. It says right here, Y is total cost, X equals pounds of candy. So when they give us the cost, we're going to go back to our equation. So let's highlight that too, because this is our equation we're using. So when they give us cost, where are we going to put that? In place of Y. So go up to your equation, put 1350 in place of Y, and then solve for X. So you'd write 1350 equals 0.75x, and we don't really need the plus 0, right? So this is our equation we're going to solve. So you guys remember how to do that? I'm going to flip it over because remember how I like my x on the left all the time. So this is times, so I do the opposite, divide. 0.75 divided by 0.75. And remember, we never round answers. So if we ever get a decimal that goes on forever, remember to use your fraction button. I don't know if this one does, but just trying to get this to be a little brighter, but it's not working. So 1350 divided by 0.75. 13.50 divided by 0.75 equals, let me show you my calculator screen, 18. So that was a nice whole number. So 18 what? Well, that's why it's always a good idea to highlight these things. This is X. X is pounds of candy. And you'll see we're going to do this over and over and over again in this chapter. Write an equation from the given material, usually from the table. Then they're going to give you X. Then they're going to give you Y. Then they're going to ask you for X-intercept, Y-intercept, all kinds of things. So this is kind of giving you the flavor of what this module's about. So if we were asked to write a sentence, we would say for $13.50, we can buy 18 pounds of candy. So you usually name what's given first. Like here we said 7 pounds cost $5.25. So here we'd say $13.50 can buy 18 pounds of candy. So for $13.50, you can buy 18 pounds of candy. Okay, so we might have time to explain at least the next side. It'll probably be the next video, mostly where we're working it, but let's go ahead and go over the explanation for the next page. So this next page is actually a group activity, and it's a really fun group activity when you're in a group. Maybe it won't be so fun when you're not in a group. But what we're going to do is try and answer the questions given. So find the average growth. So slope is a lot of things. It's called the average rate of change. It's called the rate of change. It's called the change in Y over change of X. Those are all things that mean slope. So when I see average growth, isn't that the average rate of change? How fast it's growing? So the minute I see those words, I go, oh, they want us to find slope. Or as we've been calling it, it's more common in this and in calculus and in college algebra is being referred to as rate of change.